Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grad Chat from PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school beyond academic research, and that may be more difficult to talk about in our day. And I'm your host, Jaden. And if you like what you see here, check out the PhD Balance YouTube channel for more grad chats, and don't forget to subscribe for notifications about when we go live. And our topic today is Grad Chat interviews, and I'm so excited to talk about our guest, Dr. Joshua Hall. Josh is a director of graduate admissions at UNC, director of the Postbachelor Research Education Program, and the co-host and creator of Hello PhD podcast.
Jaden, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you. I have an interview on the 15th for Penn State, and I just have so many questions, like what's it going to be like, how to prepare, and yeah, everything about interviews.
Yeah, I know that it is, it's a really anxiety-provoking time. I know even under normal circumstances, preparing for graduate school interviews is something that can cause a lot of anxiety, and there are a lot of questions about how can you best prepare. And this year really ramps that up a bit because, as you know, with your Penn State interview, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But all of these grad school interviews are taking place virtually, in a lot of cases for the first time. So under normal circumstances, you probably would fly somewhere or drive somewhere and visit a campus and meet with people in person and see the sites. But this year, things are going to be happening virtually. And I know that adds an extra layer of uncertainty to that process. So my hope is that through this chat today, we can hopefully alleviate some of that uncertainty and really help people prepare and feel as confident as possible for these virtual interviews that are coming up, and especially for your interview, Jaden.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, there's some downsides of a virtual interview compared to in person, but what do you think are some of the upsides of a virtual interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one thing we've been trying to think about even on our side as we prepare for virtual interviews from the program point of view, is maybe there are some positives we can take from this, some silver linings. The number one thing is this year you can do your grad school interview with your pajama pants on. So that's good news. But I think seriously though, this year is going to allow applicants to really hopefully feel more comfortable. You're going to be in your own surroundings, hopefully a place you have a lot of control over your setting and your environment where you're going to participate in these interviews. So I know it can cause a lot of anxiety for people in a typical year to have to go to an unfamiliar place, be around a lot of unfamiliar people, not know what to expect. And so this year you are going to have a lot more control by being, in your own space to do these interviews. And so I think that can be a positive. There's going to be a whole lot less of walking around in uncomfortable shoes. So I think that can be good too. But I think another piece is programs. Like, we are really cognizant of the fact that it's going to be more challenging for our applicants to get the information they need to make a decision about where to go to grad school. And I think it's important to say up front that a lot of times when we do these grad school interviews, or when we talk about them, the hard part is getting an interview, right? So when we review, we actually are just finishing the application review stage for our program. And that's really where there's a big cut. There's a lot of applications that come in. And by the time we're inviting people to interview, we already think you're really great from what we've read on your application. So interviews from a program's perspective are often as much about recruitment as they are interviewing you and grilling you, right? It's really a two-way street. We want to put our best foot forward too. And I know that we have a lot of concern in our own ability to do that. We want to impress you. We want to show off our best side. And we think a lot about the fact that it's harder to do that virtually. So, I can say, I know for our program and a lot of other programs, we're devoting a considerable amount of time and energy and thought into how can we be creative to get you the information that you need to really check us out and to make your decision about where to go to graduate school.
Yeah, thanks for all that information. And on that note, it's really important to ask questions. Do you have an idea of what are some good questions to ask? Like, I feel like I don't even know where to begin with questions. I know I want to ask about funding, and I kind of want to ask about like mentorship style. But other than those two questions, I'm not sure what else I should like even be asking.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And this is really, I think this really highlights one thing I wanted to make sure to say is while on one hand, the thought of doing interviews virtually feels really different than the way that things are typically done, you know, from from a certain viewpoint, there's really not a huge difference though. A lot of the information you need is the same, whether you're doing a virtual interview or an in-person interview. And some of those key questions that you should think about asking are the same this year as they have always been. And certainly one that you mentioned is an important one, funding. So does a program fund all of its graduate students? Does it guarantee your funding during the entire time you're a PhD student? Or is it imperative that you, the grad student, acquire your own funding at some point? Maybe you're funded for the first year or two, but then it's really on you as the grad student to secure your own funding after that to continue on the program. That's something you definitely want to know about and you definitely want to ask about. And I think sometimes applicants feel really apprehensive or self-conscious about asking about funding, like they think it's rude to ask about funding, but it's really not. I mean, that's a key consideration that is going to be an important question for you, is asking about funding. Along those lines with funding, if you think about one of the most important decisions you will make in graduate school, it's the lab you join, or it's the faculty person that you decide to work with as a PhD student. That's a huge decision. So I think you want to make sure you understand for each program how that process works. Is it the type of program where you kind of need to work that out ahead of time? Then you need to know that. Or, for our program and for a lot of biomedical programs, there's a laboratory rotation period. So all first year graduate students actually rotate through 3 different labs and work with 3 different advisors before ultimately making a decision. You want to make sure you understand how that process works. But I think importantly, you want to make sure there are people doing work that you're interested in doing at the program that you're applying for. I think that's really the most important thing is there research that's interesting to you that's happening at that place? And then beyond that, is there evidence that you're going to get the support you need to be successful there? And so I think that leads to another question you can ask, which is, what are the outcomes of graduate students who come in through your program? What percentage of the students who come in finish with their PhD? How many of them get through the program? If a program, only half the students who come in are getting through, well, that might be something you want to know versus 90%, right? What support mechanisms are in place to help students as they transition through the program? I think these are all important questions for you to answer.
All right, and on that note, say you're starting to ask questions and you're receiving some answers and you're not sure about them. Like, how do you know if a program has like quote unquote green flags, or if they kind of have some red flags and that program may not be good for you?
Yeah, that's really important. Honestly, I mean, that's a really important part of the interview process from the point of view of an applicant is, certainly from a program's perspective during an interview, they've seen your application on paper, right? So they have an idea of sort of who you are, what you've done, but it's the opportunity for them to meet you and learn more about you. But also the interview is really important for the applicant because it's your chance to really see what a program looks like beyond a web page, right? You can really hopefully interact with some current graduate students and kind of learn about what their experiences are like to look for some of these potential red flags for programs. Now, I know this is an area where a lot of applicants are especially apprehensive this year because there's concern that might be harder to do in a virtual type of interview to identify any possible red flags that a program might have. Now, I can speak for our own program at UNC-Chapel Hill that we are really working hard to make sure our applicants all have plenty of opportunities to not just interact with our faculty, but we'll still have plenty of opportunities to interact with our current graduate students. So, you should expect during your virtual interview to be able to interact with current students in the program. And a lot of times it's those interactions, it's those conversations where you can hopefully peel back some layers and really try to understand what is the life of a graduate student? What's the well-being of a graduate student in these programs? Do people seem happy? Do they seem to like their life? Do they seem to think that they made a good choice, right? Sometimes you can talk a little more informally with graduate students. And I should say too, that hopefully you can expect to interact with graduate students without faculty and without program administrators around. And I think it can be really helpful too, to kind of observe how current graduate students of that program interact with each other. Do they seem friendly? Are they mentioning, hanging out with each other outside the program? Do they mention having a social life, doing fun things in the area that they like to do outside of research, outside of academia? Those can give you clues to, if you think about it, putting yourself in their position a year from now, right? When you're a graduate student in that program, are those graduate students, does that seem like the type of life, the type of situation you want to be in a year from now? That can be really helpful. And I'll say, if you go through your virtual interviews experience and you don't feel like you really got to get the information you wanted or speak with students who are currently in the program to get some of that information and ask them some of those questions, I think it's completely valid to ask the program. Say, hey, could you connect me with some current grad students? I would love to, talk more with them about their experiences. And a program should be eager to let you do that as they're trying to recruit you. And if they're not, if you feel like they're trying to hide the grad students for some reason, that in and of itself could be a red flag.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is very informative. Another question we just got from the chat is, how can someone phrase their question about funding? Like, I'm assuming I don't want to just straight up say like, so what's the funding situation? But like, is there like a good way to kind of phrase it that's a bit more tactful?
Well, I think sometimes students worry more about this than faculty do or than programs do, because we understand that that's a really important question that you are going to have. So, I think you can say, hey, how are students in the program supported, right? Is funding guaranteed, or what's the expectation of students to find their own funding? I know for our program in the biomedical sciences, funding is actually guaranteed for our PhD students throughout the time they're in graduate school, as long as they're in good standing. And so it's very easy for us to say that, because that's a good thing, to say. But I also know biomedical programs sometimes are very different, have very different funding considerations than other types of programs. So I think it's a really fair question. And I guess think about it this way. You don't want to not ask a question that's going to be critical to your experience or your success. You don't want to not ask that question just because you're kind of worried how it might come off, right? If it's going to be really important to you, because wouldn't you rather know the answer to that up front before you make a decision and commit and go move somewhere? Wouldn't you rather know up front than get there, move your life somewhere, and then you find out, oh man, like my ability to be here is like completely dependent on my ability to get a grant next year, right? I didn't know that. I might have, wouldn't you have rather known that ahead of time? So you know what to expect, right? So you know what you're getting into. And the other thing you can ask too with the funding is, let's say the answer is, well, we really have an expectation that our graduate students will get their own funding, after a certain period of time. Well, then a follow-up question that's completely valid to ask is, well, okay, so students in your program, what percent usually are successful in getting that funding, right? What support mechanisms are in place to help students do that, right? I think that's what you want to know. And I will say, and this is a possible red flag that I will point out. If the answer to that question is, we don't know, we actually don't know, we don't have a good answer for what percentage of our students usually are successful or end up having trouble finding funding and have to leave, I think that's a red flag. So I think you want a program that's paying attention to its students and their success, and actually have metrics and want to know how the students are doing, so that the program can make course adjustments if they need to, if students are having trouble in any aspect of the program.
All right. And then on the side of like answering questions rather than asking, how does a grad school interview in general is compared to like a job interview? Is it like as firmer? Is it more like a conversation? What is the grad school interview like?
Yeah, that is a great question. And one thing that I often hear from applicants after they have gone through the grad school interview process is they are surprised how much less stressful it was than they thought it was going to be. I think sometimes even just hearing the word interview puts a lot of, really gets your nerves going, because you're probably imagining, sitting in this room and there's a group of people on the other side of some table and they're just throwing questions at you. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What are your greatest attributes? And it's really not like that at all, typically. So, I like to tell applicants that grad school interviews are really a lot more like conversations than they are interviews. And so hopefully you have applied to programs that you're really interested in the science that's going on there, the research that's happening there, and hopefully the faculty that you'll be meeting with, that you'll be talking to, whether that's in person or over Zoom, are doing stuff that you think is really cool. So if you can sort of switch your mindset from, oh my gosh, this is a scary interview, to, wow, this is really cool. I have an opportunity to talk to these really amazing researchers about this work that I find really fascinating. That's really cool conversation that I get to have. I think that can dial the pressure back a little bit, because really that's what it is. You're going to be, for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour, depending on the specific structure of the interview, you're going to just be talking to someone about their work, and they're going to be asking you about your work, right? And probably that conversation will flow naturally back and forth, and you may talk about research. You may then also talk about the program in general, or what the culture is like at that place, or what living in that area is like. But from at its core, the grad school interview is talking to someone about research, about their research and your research. So I guess to build upon that, if I can give some advice for preparation for these interviews, you should definitely expect to be asked about research that you have done in the past. So these faculty, these people you're talking with, they've seen your application, they've seen your CV, they've read your personal statement, so they have an idea about what research have you done in the past, what things have you been interested in. So you likely will be asked about the research you've done before. So that shouldn't come as a surprise. So you want to make sure if there's some research that you're doing now, or if there's research maybe that you did a little bit ago and you haven't been thinking about it, it's not quite as much in the front of your mind, you want to brush up on that. You want to make sure you're feeling ready to have a conversation about the work you do. And that's not just the specifics of what are the experimental details of what did I do. You want to know that, but also what's the big picture? Like, why is the work that I've been involved in important, right? I think those are the types of questions you might get. And then beyond that, hopefully, before you go and do your interview, you'll get some information, some schedule about who are the faculty that I'm going to talk to during my interview. And I really recommend to applicants that if you know who you're going to talk to ahead of time, that you spend a little bit of time just familiarizing yourself with who they are. What do they do? Hopefully they're doing research that kind of aligns with the type of research you want to do. That's something we work really hard to do on our side when we're putting together your schedule. When you come to interview, we want you to talk to the faculty that you want to talk to, right? So as much as we can, depending on faculty availability, we try to give you a good schedule that you're going to be really excited to take part in. So I think it can be helpful to look at people, see what they're doing now. I don't think you have to go and read in detail every paper that person has published for the last 5 years, but maybe glance over some abstracts, just familiarize yourself. That way, when you go into that conversation, you're going to be more confident about what type of research they're doing and are going to be able to engage. And I think that's the main thing that differentiates a really successful interview to maybe one that's not quite as successful is your engagement level, right? You know you're going to be having a conversation about science, but you want to avoid the pitfall of just sort of sitting back, being quiet, and letting the faculty person talk the whole time, right? You want to be asking questions. It should be a back and forth. You want to show that you are interested and engaged in that conversation as well.
Yeah, you just answered my next question. I was just about to ask about how prepared should I be to like know the research? Should I read like just kind of like their lab website and some abstract? Should I read like multiple papers from them? But you already answered that, so thank you for that. My next question is, you just talked about how to be as successful during the interview, but what are some things that we should avoid doing? Like, what are some common missteps someone might do and what we want to make sure we don't do during an interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think one of the biggest missteps that could be made is similar to what I alluded to a little bit just a second ago, and that is not talking enough, right? Not engaging enough. And I know sometimes it can feel like when you enter into a conversation with a faculty person that, especially somebody you don't know, and it's also in the context of this interview, so you're probably nervous, and here's this faculty person, and you know there can be this tendency to really retract yourself, right? And oftentimes what happens, I don't know, I'm sure you have experience talking to faculty. Faculty love to talk about their research. So, you know, at some point during the conversation, you might ask, and you probably will ask, you'll say, hey, you know, tell me a little bit about the work you do, or I know you work on this, can you tell me more about that? You know, they are instantly going to switch into, oh, presentation mode. And, you know, if this were an in-person interview, sometimes they might even flip their monitor around and pull up their most recent PowerPoint. And with Zoom interviews, you know, this could be even more pronounced because you could even have a faculty who says, oh, well, let me pull this PowerPoint up and share my screen. And they start going into presentation mode. And so a potential pitfall for you as an applicant at that point is that you also go into presentation mode, except you go into audience member mode. And so you're sitting there quietly as they go through their slides, and you can't even see them because the slide is their screen sharing. And if you have a 30-minute interview, you don't want to look up at the clock and realize, oh no, this interview is about to end and I haven't said anything about me, right? Because remember, it's not an interview about them, it's an interview about you, right? And so you don't want to get to the end of that interview and they have talked 95% of the time and you haven't had an opportunity to share your interests and your science and your motivation. So I think what you want to make sure you do is, even when the faculty you're talking to are describing their research, that you are treating that in this context more like a conversation and not like a presentation, right? That you're interrupting. And I think another thing you can do too is, you know, the expectation is not that you're going to know everything, right? I mean, you're just hearing about this stuff. Maybe you know a little bit about it because you were looking up some abstracts or something. But if they're on slide 1 and there's something you're interested in or you don't quite understand, interrupt them then, right? And start asking questions at that point. You know, you don't want to wait 15 minutes and realize like, I'm really lost right now, but now I don't even know how to jump in and ask a question, right? So feel free to interrupt and remember it is a conversation. I think that's probably the biggest red flag, is not engaging enough. And then I think the last thing I'll say about this has to do with interacting with other students in the program. You know, that is an important time too. Any opportunity you have during this virtual interview, I mean, especially during virtual interviews, it's really critical for you to try to extract as much information as you can from this virtual interview experience. So certainly there are going to be required one-on-one interviews with faculty, but then there might be a lot of other planned events, planned virtual events, where there will be students or they might be more informal. And man, I know here at the beginning of 2021, if you're like me, you're completely zoomed out, like you are so tired of Zoom meetings, and I'm tired of Zoom meetings. But as much as you can, you know, try to attend and try to really participate and be engaged, not just in the interviews with faculty one-on-one, but any other opportunities that the program provides you to interact with other students in the program, other people in the program, other faculty in an informal way. Yeah, I know it's Zoom and I know that sucks and everybody's tired of Zoom, but sometimes it's during those informal interactions and those other interactions outside of the one-on-one interview where you really start to get some of the information you want to know. Some of the things we talked about just a few minutes ago, learning about, what's it like to be a student here? What are there red flags or green flags? Like, is this great? Everybody's really eager to tell you how great their program is. You're not going to necessarily experience that through the one-on-one interview, but make sure you really fully participate in these other things too.
Thank you. If you get asked a question and you don't quite know the answer to it, is it best to like try to answer? Or is it best to just simply say like, I don't know?
I think it is always okay to say, I don't know. I think there's sometimes the feeling that you have to like come up with something. But if your options are to say, I don't know when you truly don't know, or to BS some answer, sometimes just being upfront, say, I don't really know that. And sometimes when you're asked a question, especially if it's a scientific question, sometimes these questions that are thrown out sometimes the answer is not just that you don't know, but like nobody knows. It's like a big picture thing, like I always use the example of, you're explaining your science and then somebody raises their hand and asks, do you know if that also happens on Mars? Well, I don't know, like nobody knows that, so I think you could acknowledge like, oh, well, that's a really fascinating question, but as far as I know, I don't think anyone has looked into that, or I'm not sure, but that's something that I would be really interested to look into, or something like that. I think that's perfectly okay. Now, I will say that with the one caveat, if it's a specific question about research you're doing, so like if you describe a finding that you had from research you were doing, and you're asked for a clarifying comment of, oh, well, how did you do that experiment? Those are some things that I think there is an expectation that you would be able to answer if it's sort of directly related to the specifics of the work you were doing. But otherwise, I think it's okay just to acknowledge when you don't know.
And my last question is, what are your interviewers looking for in your answers and whatnot? You mentioned engagement, but like what else?
Yeah, well, I think, we talked a lot about engagement in the scientific conversations. But I think beyond that, what we're looking for is grad school is really hard, right? I mean, that's one reason things like PhD Balance exist. That's one reason why my podcast, Hello PhD, exists, is because graduate school and PhD training can be a really challenging time, a really stressful time. And we know that too. And so I think what's important, another thing we're looking for is that students coming into our program, they're coming into the program with open eyes, right? That they are interested in our program, right? That what we have to offer as a program really interacts with or overlaps with the interests of each student coming in. Are you likely to find things that you find interesting when you get here? Do you know what research is all about? Do you know what graduate school is all about? That's why we really prioritize during the admissions process. We prioritize your past experiences as much as anything, even more than things like your specific grades or test scores or things like that. And the reason is because at the end of the day, graduate school is as much like a job, right? It's much like work as it is school, right? So we want to make sure that you know what you're getting into and that your motivations and your career interests really align with what you're going to be doing in graduate school. So I think it's important to not only be confident talking about your research, but also being confident about why you're applying to graduate school in the first place and why do you want to go to that school. So Jaden, I know you mentioned you're interviewing at Penn State. You should be ready to talk about, why did you apply to that program? What was it about that program that was a good fit for you, that was a good match for you and where you want to go in your career? Because I think being able to really articulate why, I don't want to just go to grad school, but I would love to go to grad school here at your institution. And here's why I think I'm a really good fit and your program's a really good fit for me. That's a really good thing to be able to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're coming up on time, so if anyone in the chat has any questions, you can find Josh at JD Hall PhD or at Hello PhD. And is there anything you want to plug while you're here?
Sure. One last thing that I would love to plug is as you mentioned, I referred to a second ago, I co-host a podcast for graduate students called Hello PhD. You can find it anywhere that you find podcasts. But we just did an episode a few weeks ago on acing your virtual grad school interview. I think it's possible the link might be right down in the notes below. But I talked with Dr. Beth Bowman, who is also a graduate admissions person at Vanderbilt University. And we talked for an hour about all aspects of really having a successful virtual interview and what that's going to be like. So if you want to hear more about this virtual grad school interview process and want more information about that, highly recommend you check out that interview to learn more.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And again, Jaden, thank you so much for having me today, and good luck to everybody out there. I know it's a stressful time, but I just wanted to say good luck to you all. It will turn out okay, but best of luck to you in your interviews.
Thank you.